Hi, I'm Jon Damush, Director of Program Development for the National Association of Flight Instructors. I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the NAFI More Right Rudder podcast, the podcast for flight instructors on the go. And today, I'd like to start out by saying the sponsor of this episode is Pilot Pipeline. Now, if you haven't heard about Pilot Pipeline, they are a great website that'll help you sort of plan out your aviation career. It'll let you know what do you want to do, tell you how long to do it, and eventually help you achieve your dreams. They also have a great newsletter. So if you're interested in learning more about aviation and enhancing your career, go to Pilot Pipeline and find out more. Now, today, my guest is Jon Damush. Now, Jon is the CEO of Iris Automation. He's a NAFI member, of course. He's been flying before he learned how to drive. He's a commercial pilot and flight instructor, and he currently now spends the majority of his efforts in his company, Iris Aviation. Now, at the same time, he also represents NAFI on aviation rulemaking committees, specifically regarding drones. And the last committee he was a part of was discussing beyond line of sight for drone operators. Jon, that's a pretty great resume. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jon. It's great to be here. I love being able to contribute to NAFI and help our membership.
Yeah, absolutely. And we appreciate it. Now, certainly I mentioned a few different things and it's a lot of stuff that is really interesting. Can you sort of fill me in on a little bit of things about you and what you've been doing?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've had a bit of a meandering path through aviation. Always fascinated with airplanes, like most of us on this podcast or listening on this podcast. A lot of us were probably the annoying 5-year-old in the airport pointing out every airplane and saying, what model they are and how many passengers they carry and all that good stuff. So that was me. And that kind of drove an interest, like most of us, in science and math. And, obviously engineering was the only way I could go through college. I couldn't imagine doing anything else. But I thought I wanted to be an airline pilot. And so I, got all the ratings, started teaching people and building the hours. And then a few different things happened at the same time. My wife, then, pre-girlfriend, and I started to get serious. And I recognized, like, okay, so I've got this decision point in my life. Do I go down the cockpit path and, be gone a lot? Or I had this other opportunity to join this location-based entertainment company that was building flight sims for entertainment purposes. I needed an engineer who understood aerodynamics and could write code, C++ code, to basically make the airplanes fly the way they would in real life. So it was like, okay, still aviation related, but I get to stay home and develop a relationship with my wife, Rochelle. So that was the choice. I ended up just really enjoying that. It was published on 3 flight sim titles. We opened up a couple flight sim facilities. If anybody's ever been in Southern California in the early to mid 90s, you probably remember a place called Fighter Town. Not the one in Miramar that, Top Gun was shot at, but it was a location-based facility. You could come in with 11 of your friends, hop in different cockpits and fly in a virtual flight sim networked environment. So it was amazingly awesome. Cool, well ahead of its time. But that was that. And then I ended up taking over a business in early 2000s, which was a computer vision software business. And they were focused on the entertainment market, and the business wasn't really, it was successful. They'd won an Emmy Award of all things. So technically it was incredible. But the market was really small. There was only so many firms in the world that actually did that task that needed that software. So it wasn't a good business. I was asked to come look at that business and figure out what else we could do. And we identified aerial imaging as one of the areas that the technology could be readily applied to. And we ended up building a software suite that was used for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, not from, exotic high flying platforms like U-2s or SR-71s or even Global Hawks, but more the smaller, lower and increasingly unpiloted aircraft that were being deployed for this mission overseas. So we ended up selling our software into the Air National Guard's Predator and Reaper program.
Wow.
And that led to an interest from Boeing. We got integrated into their RQ-21A Blackjack program, which is the Marine Corps' tactical UAV. And then they ended up buying the business. So weird path into unmanned aviation, but that was it. And then I was in Insitu for 3.5 years, ultimately leading their growth initiatives as the chief growth officer. And then I moved up into big Boeing in their future mobility division called Boeing NeXT, where we were really trying to understand and separate reality from hype by basically forcing ourselves to go build these things. So we built things anywhere from small drones all the way up to this amazing vehicle, a 2-passenger air taxi that we built under Aurora Flight Sciences that was called Pegasus. And then we also built this vehicle that was a 12-rotor, electrically driven, 1,500-pound gross takeoff weight aircraft. Wow. And it was meant to be a heavy lift, like, an unpiloted heavy lift vehicle. Well, what it ended up being, which is really cool, was the baseline for an X-Wing fighter.
What?
Specifically 2 of them that flew over Walt Disney World when they opened the Rise of the Resistance ride in late 2019.
That was
so. If you search YouTube and you search X-Wings over Disney World, you will see those aircraft. It was insane. It was really, really fun.
So being a Star Wars nerd, that is amazing because I have seen that video and it's incredible to know that you helped put that together. Holy cow.
Indeed. And it was really cool. It was a landmark thing with interaction with the regulator and understanding, oh my gosh, what are these things? They were remotely piloted. We were flying 2 at once from a single operator's workstation because it was choreographed with lights and music and all of that. So it was really, for Boeing, cool. It was Star Wars and Disney, but really what it was a leader project into the regulatory environment around these types of operations, these types of aircraft. So a lot of lessons learned, a lot of relationships built with the regulator. The regulator learned a lot about how this stuff can start to work. And that was really kind of a path that led me into this intersection between uncrewed aircraft, traditional aviation, and new and existing regulations. So I was recruited to come take over business Iris Automation. And what we do is we build computer vision technologies to help piloted or unpiloted aircraft see and avoid other aircraft. Like, the thing that scares most of us when we go flying, because we know we're not great at this job. As is evidenced by the fact that there's still 15 to 25 mid-air collisions in America every year on average. And we all know most of them are fatal. So it's not a great solution. The truth is we stay apart mostly through strategic mitigations, airspace, cruising altitudes, transponders, ADS-B, just careful flight planning. That's how we really avoid collisions. Our eyes in the cockpit, A, are disadvantaged because we're surrounded by structure. B, we only have so much cognitive capacity to actually do all of the things that we have to do, especially as single pilot helicopter or GA operators. And then finally, gosh, our vision is really only good enough to see traffic within about a 5-degree cone. Everything outside of there, we detect shape, color, and motion. And any instructor that's on the podcast knows the airplane that's going to hit you, how much relative motion does it have? That, right? Like, it's the worst case. So we focus, forgive the pun, on building a capability to help us do this better and to make flying safer. And in the process, what we hope to enable is the safe integration of uncrewed aircraft with all of us traditional aviators that are enjoying the national airspace.
I mean, that's incredible. One of the things that really hit home for me was years ago, I was actually at an in-person flight instructor refresher clinic. Remember those for flight instructors out there? Remember when we used to actually get together and have a weekend course for this? But we used to host one here at NAFI headquarters.
Can you even still do that?
I know they're still out there
post-pandemic.
I know they're still out there, but they're just not what they were before.
Yeah.
Human contact, it's frightening. But I remember this video that one of the FERC operators would use. And it was basically a simulation video of you're about to have a head-on collision, and you it sort of circles a little speck way off in the distance, and it gives you this time lapse of like, this is real time of how it's going to happen. And it's like that. It goes from a speck to, it's too late. And so to your point of the airplanes are big, right? Like, how many times has a controller said, hey, there's a 737 at your 1 o'clock, at 1,000 feet above, and you're like, I can't find it. It's white, right? Because they all are white. I can't find it. So the idea of being able to spot a drone that, even in the more sort of commercial realm where they're maybe 3 feet long, how am I going to do that? So to know that there's a guy out there,
you're disadvantaged to do that.
Yeah.
Right. And for a bunch of different reasons. One, like you just hit on, the absolute size of the vehicle. These are small. And we all know small things when you're moving fast in a big sky are really hard to see. The second thing is they're typically operating in altitude below most piloted aviation, with the exception of, helicopter ops and maybe some low altitude crop duster and maybe some training, right? But for the most part, most of the drone applications are below 500 feet GL. So combine that with the fact that now we have to somehow see a smaller target with ground clutter as the background. Do you remember the old Southwest livery that had brown top of the airplane?
Yeah.
Orange on the bottom and had brown on the top. You could not see that airplane if you were above it in altitude in the Southwest, ironically, because the entire Southwest is brown. So, fortunately now the tops of them are blue and the bottoms are orange and brown, which is very nice contrast and very easy to see Southwest these days. But so, all these disadvantages really make it hard for the piloted aviation community to see and avoid the unpiloted aircraft. So our view, again, look at the punny, it's just happening all the time, is because the drones are typically below where the piloted aircraft are, we're more advantaged to see the piloted aircraft because we more often have sky as background, one. Two, the GA aircraft or helicopter is larger in size because it has to carry people. And those things combine to give us an advantage to be able to use commercial off-the-shelf camera technology. We don't build the cameras, we don't build the processors, we use NVIDIA processors and off-the-shelf cameras, but to write software algorithms using computer vision and machine learning that allow our technology to detect something that's moving in the space differently than you are and differently than the Earth. Out of that candidate list, we then use our machine learning classifiers that we train with tens of thousands of hours of actual flight footage. And we classify the type: small plane, small helicopter, hot air balloon, hang glider. Once we have a classification, now we have knowledge of its real world size and its dynamics, right? What can it do physically in terms of motion prediction and things like that? We combine all that together on board, real time, running at 10 frames per second to feed information either to a human pilot or to an autopilot as to when there's a collision threat. So, and it can see 360 degrees around the airplane. It's mounted on the outside, so there's no structure in the way. It has nothing to do. It's uniform resolution across the entire field of regard, which means that little area that we see within 5 degrees of our field of view, our system sees 360 degrees. So, we're very bullish and very confident that this is going to improve flight safety. In addition to the economic benefits of now allowing the airspace to be utilized more efficiently by both crewed and uncrewed air vehicles.
So first and foremost, that makes me feel comforted, right? Knowing that there's a group like yours that are trying to come up with these things that's going to keep me safe in a crewed airplane. That really kind of gives me the warm fuzzies, it's because there does seem to be a little bit of a friction between communities because there's a new guy in town, right? And the old guys are going, well, what are we going to do? And as NAFI, we want to try to kind of bring these groups together and understand that we're all working towards a common goal.
Yep.
And knowing that these kinds of things are on the cusp of being a regularly implemented piece of technology. I mean, that's amazing to me.
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head, because when you think about like disruption,
Yeah.
right? Like that's the Silicon Valley buzzword, right? When it comes to safety-oriented industries, disruption sounds scary, and rightfully so, right? Like our safety record in aviation is what it is because of hundreds of learning, right? Consistency and rigor of approach, right? That's what's led to the safety system we have. So when we hear things like disruption, it makes us nervous. Like, wait a minute, you're going to come in and try something brand new? Like, hold on, there's lives at stake.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, and that's a healthy, I think, skepticism, right? Like I tend to bias on that side a little bit. But at the same time, what we run the risk of is not finding advantages to help the safety record through new technologies.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's about building that bridge, right? It's about helping these two worlds understand each other. We like to call the new people the new entrants. So that's kind of the politically correct term. They're coming at this with tons of energy and innovation, and it's great, but a lot of times they have zero aviation experience.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, aviation has been a long time, and we've learned lessons the hard way that are immutable. So, you have to understand that coming in. So someone like me coming into this space and Silicon Valley and the investor community, I try to help educate people on why certain things are the way they are. And once you do, these are intelligent people. They go, oh, okay, got it. So it's really about education on that side. Same thing on the traditional aviation side. AI, like, oh, I never want autonomous planes. Like, stop. Like, we don't need autonomy. The airplane doesn't need to be smart. It needs to be automatic, right? There's a difference between those two things, right? And that, I don't know about you, John, but I fly a Bonanza, and I love it. Like we've got the cool Garmin stack in there. We actually just got a 750 put in, which is just like, golly, that thing is amazing. Like touching screens, it's really cool.
Oh yeah.
But the airplane honestly flies itself better than I can hand fly it. I hate that because I love hand flying, but at the same time, when I'm really under pressure to execute an approach precisely with my family in the back, guess what? Like, I'll let the airplane fly, because then it frees me up cognitively to watch what's happening. My situational awareness is higher. My communications are better. Like, it's a good thing to have automation help the human operator, right? But we don't need to be autonomous, right? I don't need to let the airplane do everything. I'm still in charge.
Right.
And honestly, I think that's the level aviation needs to get to enable the kind of scale that people are talking about, with anything from drones to air taxis to single pilot operations to simplified pilot operations. It's about smart use of automation. We don't need to have Cyberdyne systems, Model T101, learning computers in our cockpits. Like, that's not where we're headed. We don't need to go there. We can build an automated system someday that allows you and I to get in cockpit as a passenger, because by that time we'll probably have lost our licenses and medicals, but and say, I want to go here, or we uploaded it from our phone because our kids just showed us how to use our mobile device to do that, and the airplane will take us there. Like, that's going to happen, but it doesn't need to be autonomous, right? Like, so I think there's a lot of misperception that comes out of words that we use in this space, and especially between those two communities that you identified, which is the legacy traditional aviation community and the new entrants. But there's a lot of goodness. There's a lot of Venn diagram overlap here that we can both benefit each other. The new entrants obviously are coming in here because they're capitalists, and we see opportunity. Great. Like, that's the fuel for progress in our country. But for the traditional aviators, man, there's a lot of really good stuff here that's going to help safety and efficiency and predictability and reliability if we just embrace some of these new methods a little bit more. So that's kind of what drives me passionately to do what I do every day. And frankly, the reason our company exists.
Now, and forgive me if you said this already, but I don't think you did. can that technology be retrofitted onto a passenger airplane to help them
Sure.
see and avoid as well?
Sure. We do most of our tests with our system strapped to both drones, and we have an X-Cub that we use as a surrogate for GA aircraft, because the X-Cub can safely fly at low altitudes anywhere from like 40 knots up to 140 knots,
Wow.
which is really cool.
Yeah.
So we have the system instrumented on the aircraft. We have it on our drone aircraft. We also have a ground-based version that just looks up and monitors sky for non-cooperative aircraft. And then we share that data either with autopilots or ground control stations or common operating pictures or humans.
Huh. That's really cool.
It is. We just did some flight tests with Embraer down in Brazil, as a matter of fact, where we put our 360-degree field of view system on a helicopter. And this was in support of their program to support Eve, which is their future eVTOL air taxi company, just went public last month. So we flew up and down the coast, and you can't believe the amount of helicopter traffic that happens off the coast of Brazil. And, doesn't exactly seem to follow rules. There's kind of people going everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's like, wow, what a great test environment. But there's an example. And, we've talked to helicopter operators from law enforcement to first responders to fire to Customs and Border Patrol. When helicopter operators are flying a mission, they're typically at low altitude and low energy states.
Mm-hmm.
And their attention is usually paying attention to something on the ground. Maybe they're a news helicopter, maybe they're a police officer in support of an officer, on a call, and they need to pay attention to that. So their division of attention and the amount of attention they need to spend looking and scanning for traffic is lower than most of us have in normal aviation operations. So they're scared to death of people flying into them, both manned and unmanned.
Yeah.
So so we're seeing a lot of demand from that space. We're actually really cool project we're doing with Becker Avionics right now. Becker is they make radio heads for a lot of the helicopter fleets, and one of their head units has 3D spatial audio built in. So we feed a traffic detection to the head unit, and what it does is compute the spatial audio so that you as the pilot hear a traffic alert, but it's spatially oriented correctly.
What?
So if it's at your 6 o'clock, you'll hear traffic back here. Super cool, very intuitive. You don't have to look at a display. Intuitively where the traffic is, and you can just make a small flight adjustment.
Well, and for our future aviators out there, they're doing that kind of stuff with video games and movies. When you wear a headset, they can direct the sound, so if there's somebody sneaking up behind you and stuff. So that's going to be an intuitive
the same thing.
Technology that they're already used to using. And so when they get into the professional environment, that's going to be a seamless transition. That's incredible.
Exactly the same thing. Yep.
Huh. So John, I could talk to you about this stuff all day. But one of the things I really want to hit before we run out of time is this beyond line of sight. You said it was an ARC.
Aviation Rulemaking Committee. So it was initiated last June. The FAA handpicks people that they want to participate. And they pick those people because of their aviation lineage and resume, but also organizations that they work for or represent. And they have industry come together, and they give them a task, which is to produce a report back to the FAA with recommendations. And those recommendations are intended to be biased. They are intended to represent industry's view of what we think the FAA should do to enable certain things. So, you go all the way back to the 90s, GPS, there was an ARC that preceded GPS rulemaking, right? So anytime there was new rulemaking, there's typically an ARC that solicits this feedback from industry. That report then goes to the FAA, they ruminate on it, and they derive what becomes a notice of public rulemaking, which is basically the draft of the rule that they put out for public content or comment. Then the public has a certain period to comment, question, challenge. The FAA, by constitutional law, has to respond to each and every public comment or question. So depending on how engaged the public is, the FAA's job can get pretty damn big.
Yeah.
But so it goes from ARC to NPRM to comment period, and then to final rulemaking. And that's when we get new rules on the books. So I was part of the BVLOS, Beyond Line of Sight, ARC, Aviation Rulemaking Committee. There were about 90 of us across industry. And I was originally part of it from the Iris automation perspective and what our company does. But as I sat in the first few meetings and started to learn who the other members were, and we got into conversations about existing regulations, two things struck me. One, boy, even within the traditional aviation community, not all of us know the regs very well.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, okay, we kind of need to baseline here and kind of go through part by part so people understand what we're talking about. And then, of course, the new entrant community, which you don't expect to know much about the broader parts of the FARs, bringing them up to speed with the ones that really matter. So that was kind of, awareness point number one. And number two, as I looked around the roster, there were no flight instructors. And there was no representation for flight instructors. And I thought to myself, I'm like, man, like this is a thing that is going to put a lot more aircraft into low altitude airspace, controlled and uncontrolled, where a lot of GA pilots learn to fly. Boy, it really seems like the instructor community should have a voice here. So I kind of, without telling anybody, assumed that responsibility a little bit, not necessarily representing NAFI, like not officially, but at least offering commentary and education for this community of people that was the BVLOS ARC from a flight instructor's point of view. It's very easy for a new entrant to say, oh, no one ever flies below 500 feet. And I'm like, well, but you can. 91Y19 lets you do it. Mm-hmm. So, and when you have an operation that has you do it, you got to be instructed in that option. So yeah, I do spend some time down at low altitude, in uncontrolled airspace in the middle of nowhere. Like this happens, and it happens with more regularity than the new entrants could perceive. So now all of a sudden, the thing they thought the FAA was just throwing at them as like obfuscation and, foot dragging. Wrong. Like, no, there's really people out there that are allowed legally to fly aircraft without electrical systems. Mm-hmm. God bless America. Like that is amazing. But we got to share the sky, right? So how can we do this, right? Without being unfair to any community. And there's one member of the ARC, a good friend of mine, and he says, you don't have a good deal until everybody's a little bit upset. Yeah. Like, okay, I prefer the flip side of that until everybody's a little bit happy. But it's true, right? Like this new community can't expect the existing community to just equip with all new stuff, have to learn new airspace designations. Like that's a little bit on the unfair side. Similarly, the traditional community needs to take a look at these new entrants and look at what technology does allow them to do. And have an open mind to how, maybe the adoption of certain technologies might actually help everybody get a little bit better. So those are kind of my two initial, observations of sitting on the ARC. But then I thought about it. I'm like, there's gonna be more of these. Mm-hmm. And there's gonna be more of these committees. There's gonna be more of these discussions. There's gonna be more regulatory interactions where the flight instructor community needs to be aware. So, my primary goal with this call with you is to just help our constituency understand what's going on. Yeah. I know there's some other things that are planned in NAFI to help our community get there better. But then also just offer and just volunteer, my existing position and my access to these communities as a conduit for NAFI. Mm-hmm. So that as NAFI does take official positions on things, I can communicate that. And I can communicate it from a position of trust in these communities because I've been in them. I'm a known quantity. And obviously I've got the credentials via remote FERCs to stay current,
There you go.
Yeah.
So I believe you said that this particular ARC has completed whatever it is that they were doing. Was there something that came out of that, or like what was the final position?
It was a massive report that had something like 27 recommendations in it with all the justification and deliberation and support data that you could imagine. So it is a massive piece of work. It's actually quite an impressive piece of work considering none of us did this full time.
Right.
Well, I should say this was our second full-time job.
Right.
but the level of effort that everybody put into it was really amazing. You go into these things and you think, okay, here we go. So they're boondoggle, everybody dials in. There's, X number of people on the call. There'd be one or two people pushing their agenda. But everybody really leaned into this one, which kind of indicates the level of demand there is for these new capabilities. And it was good work done. There was a lot of really good, transparent, authentic conversations. We're allowed to disagree. As a matter of fact, there's a couple recommendations that I disagree publicly with that's on record. AOPA disagreed with a handful of the recommendations, but on the other side, there's a bunch of really good recommendations, specifically around, say, aircraft certification. If a battery is the fuel source, should changing a battery really require an A&P? Right? Like things like that. No, I can go fuel my Bonanza up, self-serve at the pump, which is probably infinitely more dangerous than, popping out a battery and putting it in. So there's a lot of stuff in there around aircraft certification, pilot certification, concepts of operation. There's a section on right-of-way rules, which is the one that obviously I'm most interested in. The general community of new entrants is certainly pushing for drones below a certain altitude to basically not have a requirement to see and avoid. I vehemently disagree. I think everybody that uses the airspace shares this responsibility to avoid collisions. So we have to find a path to make that possible for both communities. But the report's public. If you Google search BV loss ARC report, you'll probably find it. Give yourself about a month's supply of coffee and a few weeks to digest it because it is dense. But it gives an indication of where some of these things are headed. So I would recommend that, this listenership, is that a word when you're on podcasts?
Yeah, I'd say so. Let's do it. Let's coin it.
Well, let's say audience. I can be safe by saying audience. Go look at it. And even if you just skim the summary of recommendations or the executive summary, I think it's good for the flight instructor community to be aware of what's happening, and secondarily, how fast it's moving. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of momentum behind unpiloted aviation, and there's a lot of capital behind it.
Yeah.
I think it can be directed the right direction, but the right voices have to be in this, and our community has to have a voice here.
Yeah, and first and foremost, as a rep of NAFI, I'd like to publicly say thank you for the efforts of representing the flight instructors. And one of the things that I really enjoy about working for NAFI, and I was a NAFI member before I started working here, so just understanding the community that we live in is our members care about stuff, right? Like, I have always said that NAFI is sort of the empty jug, and we fill it with the members. We're not here to necessarily take the credit for the things that you do and our other amazing members, but what we are here to do is promote the efforts and the blood, sweat, and tears that you all put into these things. So it's really important to us to be able to share with the community that you're putting hard work into this. And we really appreciate that you reached out to our board chair, Karen Kalishak, and brought her into the conversation. And of course, you said yes. Originally, it was sort of an unofficial representation, but I think we've gotten past that now. It's cool to be able to say that you're the designated NAFI rep for this type of conversation. And there will be more, like you said. I mean, we have a sort of drone task force. We haven't really called it that, but I'm going to coin that right now. Drone task force of NAFI members and instructors who are trying to, like we said, bridge the gap between the communities and figure out, a teacher's a teacher. It doesn't matter whether you're teaching a hot air balloon, a Cessna 172, a drone, or a helicopter. A lot of the instructional techniques are going to be the same. And I think our end goal is also the same. And that's, we want people to be able to operate safely in the environment of which they operate. And that is something that we share both in sort of the ideals, but also in the physical environment. We operate in the same ones. So it's in our best interests for all the groups to be able to do this together. And so once again, I think that your efforts are great, and we really appreciate the idea that it's adding to safety.
Yeah, my pleasure. And we shouldn't leave off that this new community is going to present tremendous opportunities for flight instructors in terms of career paths. Mm-hmm. They might not be the one that's in everybody's heads right now towards the left or right seat of a bigger airplane that goes faster, but these new organizations, they need aviation experience, they need expertise, and they need, you kind of alluded to, fundamentals of instruction. The flight instructor community has all of those things and can really bring some leadership to these companies when the time is right, especially in the air taxi space. There's going to be a lot of training required in that space. And guess what? Instructors know a thing or two about putting together training syllabus, right? So it's a good thing.
If John, if somebody wanted to learn more about Iris Automation, where would they go?
Yeah, www.irisonboard.com. Check
out Iris Automation. It sounds like they're doing some really cool stuff. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do. And Drone Safety Day is coming up on June 18th. NAFI is going to have some special things coming out for that. And we've got a special announcement that will be made on that day for the drone community. But again, thank you very much, John, for joining us tonight.
John, my pleasure. Thanks.